The sunset painted the sky crimson over the rolling hills of Montana Territory as Rosalind Keller stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, tears threatening to spill from her hazel eyes. Today would be her wedding day, but there would be no joy in it, only the bitter taste of betrayal by those who should have protected her most, her own brothers. Montana Territory, 1876. The town of Aurora had sprung up around the promise of silver and opportunity following the Civil War. Like many frontier settlements, it balanced precariously between civilization and wilderness, law and lawlessness. For Rosalind, it had been home since her parents died 3 years ago, leaving her in the care of her 3 older brothers who had inherited the struggling Keller ranch. Rosalind. "Get yourself downstairs," Thomas, the eldest of her brothers, shouted from below. "Judge Parker will be here within the hour." Rosalind's hands trembled as she adjusted the simple white dress she wore. At 20 years old, she had always imagined her wedding day differently, with love, with choice, with happiness. Instead, her brothers had arranged for her to marry Harold Dawson, a man 30 years her senior who owned the largest cattle operation in the county. The arrangement would save the Keller ranch from mounting debts and secure her brothers' futures, while sentencing her to a life with a man known for his cruelty to both his animals and his previous wife. "I'm not ready," she whispered to her reflection, though she knew no amount of time would ever make her ready for this fate. The bedroom door flew open, and there stood Daniel, the middle brother, his face flushed with impatience. "Everyone's waiting. Thomas is about to burst a blood vessel." "Daniel, please," Rosalind pleaded, turning to face him. "You know what kind of man Harold is. You've seen how he treats people. How can you ask me to do this?" For a moment, something like guilt flashed across Daniel's features, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "We've been through this, Rosie. The ranch is nearly foreclosed. Without Dawson's money, we'll lose everything Pa worked for." "So you'll sell your sister instead?" Her voice cracked. "We're not selling you," Daniel snapped, though his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "It's an arrangement. Respectable folks do it all the time. Now come on." Downstairs, the modest ranch house had been hastily decorated for the occasion. A few wildflowers in jars adorned the worn dining table, and the floorboards had been swept clean. Judge Parker, a portly man with a white beard, stood by the fireplace thumbing through his Bible. Harold Dawson stood nearby, his weathered face impassive as he watched Rosalind descend the stairs. At 53, his hair had gone gray at the temples, and deep lines carved paths through his sun-damaged skin. His eyes, cold and calculating, assessed Rosalind like she was livestock at auction. The handful of witnesses included neighbors who looked uncomfortable, clearly aware of the circumstances behind this union. Thomas and the youngest brother, Zachary, stood rigidly by the window, Thomas occasionally glancing outside as if expecting trouble. "'Bout time," Thomas muttered as Rosalind reached the bottom of the stairs. "Let's get this done." Judge Parker cleared his throat. Perhaps the bride would like a moment to compose herself. "She's had plenty of time," Thomas said, taking Rosalind's arm firmly and guiding her to stand before the judge. Harold moved beside her, the smell of tobacco and whiskey emanating from him making her stomach turn. As Judge Parker began to speak, Rosalind felt as though she were underwater, the words muffled and distant. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't breathe. The room began to spin. Suddenly, the front door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, sending one of the hinges flying. Everyone turned, startled by the intrusion. Framed in the doorway stood a tall man, backlit by the setting sun. His broad shoulders filled the space, and a worn leather hat sat atop dark hair that curled at his collar. Dust from the road clung to his denim pants and boots, suggesting he'd ridden hard to get here. A revolver rested in a holster at his hip, but his hands remained relaxed at his sides. The room fell silent as he stepped inside, his spurs jangling softly against the wooden floor. The man's eyes intense, clear blue scanned the room before settling on Rosalind, then moving to the brothers. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he took in the scene before him. "What's the meaning of this?" Thomas demanded, stepping forward. "You can't just barge in here. Enough," the stranger said, his voice low but carrying the weight of thunder across the stunned room. "This ends now." Rosalind stared at the man, a flicker of recognition slowly dawning. Vaughn Kincaid. The name came to her in a rush. He'd been a friend of her father's, a skilled horseman who occasionally helped at the ranch before riding on to his next job. He'd been gone for over 2 years, heading north to Montana's gold country, or so the stories said. "Kincaid," Thomas spat. "This is family business. Get out." Vaughn ignored him, looking directly at Rosalind. "Miss Keller, are you here of your own free will?" Before she could answer, Daniel stepped between them. "She's about to be married. You're interrupting a ceremony." "I asked her, not you," Vaughn said, his gaze never leaving Rosalind's face. "Are you marrying this man because you want to?" Time seemed to stand still as everyone waited for her answer. Rosalind felt tears welling in her eyes as she finally found her voice. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, I'm not." Harold Dawson's face darkened with anger. "You ungrateful girl, after all I've done." "What exactly have you done, Dawson?" Vaughn cut in. "Besides try to buy yourself a young wife with the promise of clearing some debts." Thomas lunged forward, grabbing Vaughn's shirt. "You stay out of this. We've got papers signed. The deal is done." With one swift movement, Vaughn broke Thomas's grip and pushed him back. "She's not cattle to be traded. She's a human being with her own mind." "She's our sister," Zachary finally spoke up, his voice betraying his youth. At 19, he was only a year younger than Rosalind. "It's our job to look after her." "Is this what you call looking after her?" Vaughn asked, his voice softening slightly as he addressed the youngest Keller. "Forcing her to marry a man she doesn't love, a man old enough to be her father." Judge Parker closed his Bible with a snap. "I cannot and will not perform any ceremony where the bride is unwilling. That much is clear." He looked apologetically at Rosalind. "I should have asked you directly, my dear. That was my failing." Harold stepped forward, his face red with anger. "We had an agreement, Keller. $20,000 to clear your debts in exchange for your sister's hand. I expect you to honor it." Thomas turned on the older man. "And we will. Just give us time to talk some sense into her." "No." Vaughn's single word cut through the tension like a knife. "No more talking sense into her. No more agreements. No more treating her like property." Harold's hand drifted toward the gun on his hip. "This isn't your concern, Kincaid." In one fluid motion, Vaughn positioned himself between Rosalind and the others. "I'm making it my concern." The standoff lasted several tense seconds before Judge Parker intervened. "There will be no bloodshed in my presence, gentlemen. Mr. Dawson, I suggest you accept that this wedding will not take place today." Harold's nostrils flared as he glared at each person in the room. "You'll regret this," he said finally, directing his words at both Rosalind and her brothers. "All of you." With that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The remaining guests began to awkwardly disperse, murmuring apologies and avoiding eye contact. Soon, only Rosalind, her brothers, and Vaughn remained, along with Judge Parker, who was gathering his things. "You've just cost us everything," Thomas said, his voice low and dangerous as he addressed both Vaughn and his sister. "Your father would be ashamed of what you tried to do today," Vaughn replied evenly. "Jacob Keller was a lot of things, but he would never have sold his daughter's future for any price. Thomas lunged forward, his fist connecting with Vaughn's jaw before anyone could react. Vaughn staggered back but didn't fall. He straightened, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. "That's enough," Rosalind cried, stepping between them. "Haven't you done enough damage, Thomas?" Judge Parker cleared his throat. "I think it best if Miss Keller leaves with Mr. Kincaid for the time being. Tempers are high and things might be said or done that can't be taken back." "She's not going anywhere with him," Daniel protested. "I am," Rosalind said firmly. "I can't stay here tonight." "Not after what you tried to do." She turned to Vaughn. "If your offer of help still stands." Vaughn nodded. "It does. You can stay at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house in town. She's a good woman and she'll see you're treated right." Judge Parker nodded approvingly. "A sensible arrangement. I'll escort you both to ensure there's no further trouble." He fixed the brothers with a stern look. "And I suggest you gentlemen take some time to reflect on your actions today." As Rosalind hurried upstairs to gather a few belongings, she could hear the muffled sounds of argument below. Her hands shook as she stuffed a change of clothes and her mother's silver hairbrush into a small bag. How had it come to this? Fleeing her own home, her own family, when she came back downstairs, Zachary approached her, his expression troubled. "Rosie, I'm sorry. I didn't know how much you didn't want this. You thought what, Zach? That I'd happily marry a man who beat his first wife, who's known to be cruel and vindictive." The hurt in her voice was palpable. Zachary looked down, ashamed. "We're losing the ranch, Rosie. Thomas said this was the only way." "There's always another way," she said softly. "But not this. Never this." Outside, Vaughn had readied his horse, a powerful chestnut gelding that pawed impatiently at the ground. Judge Parker's buggy waited nearby. "You can ride with the judge," Vaughn told her, taking her small bag. "I'll follow behind to make sure there's no trouble." As the buggy pulled away from the ranch house, Rosalind couldn't help looking back. Thomas and Daniel stood on the porch, their faces hard with anger. Only Zachary raised a hand in uncertain farewell. The journey into Aurora took less than an hour, the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty road. Rosalind sat silently beside Judge Parker, her mind whirling with the day's events. "Your brothers will come around in time," the judge said kindly. "Family is family after all." Rosalind wasn't so sure. The look in Thomas's eyes had held something beyond anger. There had been calculation there, and wounded pride. A dangerous combination. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house sat on a quiet street near the edge of town. A well-maintained two-story building with a wide porch and curtained windows that glowed warmly in the gathering dusk. The proprietress herself, a stout widow with silver-streaked dark hair, answered the door promptly at their knock. "Judge Parker," she greeted, then glanced curiously at Rosalind. "What brings you by at this hour?" After a brief explanation that tactfully omitted the more dramatic details, Mrs. Holloway ushered Rosalind inside with maternal concern. "Of course you can stay, dear. I have a lovely room at the back of the house. Very quiet." Vaughn remained on the porch with the judge. "I'll be at the Silver Dollar if she needs anything," he said. "And I'll check in tomorrow, see how she's doing." Rosalind turned back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything today. I don't know what would have happened if you don't need to think about that," Vaughn interrupted gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day." As the door closed behind him, Rosalind felt a curious mixture of relief and apprehension. She was safe for now, but what came next? Her brothers controlled what little money she had. The ranch was her home, her inheritance, yet now she found herself essentially homeless. Mrs. Holloway showed her to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. "Breakfast is at 7, the older woman said, "but I can keep a plate warm if you need to sleep in after." Well, after such a trying day. Left alone, Rosalind sank onto the bed, still wearing her wedding dress. The irony wasn't lost on her. This was to have been her wedding night, spent in Harold Dawson's grand house on the hill overlooking Aurora. Instead, she sat in a boarding house room, an unwed fugitive from her own family. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to cry great, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She cried for her lost parents, for the brothers who had betrayed her, for the uncertain future that stretched before her. Eventually, exhausted, she fell into a fitful sleep, still wearing the dress that symbolized everything she had escaped. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon drifting up from below. Rosalind woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She had finally changed out of the wedding dress in the night, stuffing it into the bottom of her bag where she wouldn't have to look at it. After washing her face and braiding her long chestnut hair, she made her way downstairs to find the boarding house dining room occupied by several residents, two elderly sisters who taught at the town school, a young bank clerk, and a traveling salesman. Mrs. Holloway bustled about serving plates of eggs and bacon, pausing to introduce Rosalind as Miss Keller, staying with us for a while. The conversation around the table was mercifully mundane, touching on weather predictions and local gossip rather than failed weddings and family betrayals. Rosalind ate mechanically, her mind elsewhere. "There's someone to see you," Mrs. Holloway said quietly as she refilled Rosalind's coffee cup. "Mr. Kincaid is waiting in the parlor." Vaughn stood as she entered the small sitting room, removing his hat. In the clear light of day, she could see him properly for the first time in years. He'd aged since she last saw him, not in years so much as in experience. New lines framed his eyes, and a thin scar ran along his jawline that hadn't been there before. His dark hair was longer than was fashionable, and a shadow of stubble darkened his jaw. "How are you holding up?" he asked without preamble. I don't know," she admitted. "It doesn't feel real yet." He nodded as if he understood. "I spoke with the bank this morning. Your brothers were telling the truth about one thing: the ranch is in bad shape financially. They've taken out loans against it that they can't repay." "Why would they do that? We were managing before." She stopped, realization dawning. "The gambling. Thomas's gambling." Vaughn didn't confirm or deny, but his expression told her she was right. The point is, they were desperate and Dawson knew it. He saw an opportunity. Rosalind sank into a chair, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "What happens now? That depends on you. What do you want to happen?" The question caught her off guard. For so long her life had been dictated by others, first her parents, then her brothers. What did she want? "I want." She hesitated, then straightened her shoulders. "I want my share of the ranch. I'm entitled to it by my father's will. If they're going to lose it anyway, I should at least get what's rightfully mine before Dawson or the bank takes everything." Vaughn studied her with newfound respect. "That's fair, but it won't be easy. Your brothers won't give it up without a fight." "Then I'll fight," she said simply. "But I need work in the meantime. I can't stay here indefinitely with no money." "Mrs. Turner at the dress shop is looking for help," Vaughn offered. "And Doc Harris mentioned needing someone to keep his books in order. You've always had a good head for numbers." Rosalind looked at him in surprise. "You've been asking around for me." A slight flush colored his cheeks. "I figured you'd need options." A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Holloway's voice carried from the hallway, followed by a familiar younger voice that made Rosalind stiffen. Zachary appeared in the parlor doorway, looking uncomfortable and out of place. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Vaughn. "Rosie," he said hesitantly. Can we talk? Alone. Vaughn stood. I'll be right outside if you need me, he told Rosalind, giving Zachary a warning look as he passed. When they were alone, Zachary removed his hat, twisting it nervously in his hands. I brought some of your things, clothes and books, your mother's locket that Pa gave you. He gestured to a canvas bag he'd left in the hallway. Thank you, Rosalind said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Did Thomas and Daniel send you? Zachary shook his head. They don't know I'm here. Thomas is on a tier threatening all sorts of things. Daniel's just drinking, which isn't helping. And Dawson, he came by this morning. Said if we don't make things right, he'll call in the loans he's bought from the bank. We'll lose everything within a month. Zachary looked at her imploringly. Rosie, I'm not asking you to marry him. I swear I'm not, but we need to figure something out. I want my share, Zach. A quarter of whatever the ranch is worth. His face fell. There's nothing left to give you, Rosie. It's all mortgaged. If we sold everything tomorrow, we'd barely cover what we owe. Then what exactly do I have to come back to? She asked softly. Family, he said simply. Us. The same family that tried to sell me to a man known for cruelty. The bitterness in her voice made him wince. I didn't know, Rosie. About his first wife, about how he treated her. Thomas didn't tell us that part. She wanted to believe him. Of her 3 brothers, Zachary had always been the kindest, the one who resembled their gentle father in both appearance and temperament. I can't come home yet, she said finally. Not until I know I won't be forced into anything else against my will. Zachary nodded, accepting her decision even though it clearly pained him. I understand, but be careful, Rosie. Thomas isn't thinking straight, and Harold Dawson isn't a man who forgives being humiliated. After Zachary left, Vaughn returned to find Rosalind staring out the parlor window, watching her youngest brother's retreating figure. Everything all right? He asked. He says there's nothing left of the ranch to give me, she said without turning. That it's all mortgaged to the hilt. Vaughn was quiet for a moment. There might be another way, he said finally. Your father showed me something once, about a year before he died. A map to a silver claim he'd staked in the mountains north of here. He never developed it, said he was saving it for harder times. Rosalind turned to him, hope flickering in her eyes. A silver claim, why didn't he ever mention it to us? He was going to when the time was right. Then the fever took him. Vaughn's expression softened with old grief. Jacob was a good man. He wanted to make sure his children were provided for one way or another. You have this map. Vaughn shook his head. But I remember where he kept it. In his old Bible, the family one with all the births and deaths recorded in it. There was a false cover in the back where he tucked it away. The Bible is still at the ranch, Rosalind said, her mind racing. In the bottom drawer of his desk. No one's touched it since he died. If we could get that map, verify the claim is still valid, it could change everything. You'd have leverage, something of value that's yours alone. For the first time since the failed wedding, Rosalind felt a spark of hope. How do we get it? Thomas and Daniel won't just let me walk in and take it. Vaughn considered this. Your youngest brother seems to be on your side. Could he help? Maybe. But I'd need to get word to him without the others knowing. The ranch hands come into town Saturday nights. Zach usually with them. Rosalind nodded. He likes to play cards at the saloon, though he's terrible at it. Then we'll wait until Saturday. It's only 3 days away. Vaughn hesitated, then added, in the meantime, I've spoken to Doc Harris. He's willing to hire you to organize his accounts and correspondence starting tomorrow if you're able. You didn't have to do that. I know, but your father was good to me when I needed it most. I owe him. There was something in Vaughn's eyes that suggested there was more to the story, but he didn't elaborate. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as Rosalind settled into her new role at Doc Harris's office. The elderly physician was kind but absent-minded, his bookkeeping a disaster of scattered receipts and half-finished ledgers. Rosalind found comfort in the methodical work of bringing order to chaos, and the doctor seemed genuinely appreciative of her efforts. Word of her broken engagement and estrangement from her brothers spread through Aurora like wildfire, as secrets inevitably did in small towns. Some people avoided her eyes when she passed on the street, while others offered awkward condolences or veiled criticism disguised as concern. Mrs. Holloway fiercely defended her against the worst of the gossip, declaring to anyone who would listen that poor girl escaped a terrible fate, and shame on anyone who says otherwise. Harold Dawson made no attempt to contact her directly, but his influence was felt nonetheless. The general store owner suddenly claimed to be out of certain items when she tried to make purchases. The butcher's prices mysteriously increased when she approached his counter. It was nothing overt enough to challenge, just small reminders that Dawson had friends and allies throughout Aurora. On Saturday evening, Vaughn came to escort her to a small cafe on the edge of town, where they hoped to intercept Zachary before he joined the other ranch hands at the saloon. The cafe was run by a French immigrant named Marcel, who had somehow found his way to Montana after the Franco-Prussian War. The food was simple but far better than the standard fare offered elsewhere in town. "You look tired," Vaughn observed as they waited at a corner table. "Is the work too much?" "No, the work is fine. Good, actually." Rosalind absently traced the rim of her water glass. "It's everything else." The stares, the whispers. "I never realized how much I depended on being part of the Keller family for better or worse. Now I'm just adrift." "You're finding your way," Vaughn corrected gently. "There's a difference." Before she could respond, the cafe door opened and Zachary entered, looking around nervously until he spotted them. He hurried over, removing his hat as he sat down. "I can't stay long," he said in a low voice. "Thomas thinks I'm just coming in for supplies." "Did you find it?" Rosalind asked. Zachary nodded, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a folded piece of yellowed paper. "It was right where you said in the Bible. I don't think anyone's opened that drawer in years." Vaughn carefully unfolded the map, studying it with a practiced eye. "This is it," he confirmed. Jacob's silver claim about 15 miles north in the Highwood Mountains. According to this, he staked it legally in '68. "Is it worth anything?" Zachary asked. "Your father seemed to think so. He took samples that assayed well." Vaughn refolded the map. "We'll need to verify the claim is still valid at the land office, but if it is, Rosie could have something of her own," Zachary finished, understanding dawning on his face. "I need to know what's happening at the ranch," Rosalind said, changing the subject. "How bad is it really, Zach?" Her brother sighed, running a hand through his sandy hair. "Bad. Dawson's called in the first loan. We have 30 days to pay $5,000 or lose the north pasture and the creek access. Without that water, the ranch is finished," Vaughn concluded grimly. "Thomas is drinking too much, making wild plans about robbing the bank or running off to California. Daniel's trying to hold things together, but—" Zachary trailed off, his expression bleak. "And Dawson," Rosalind pressed. "He comes by every other day, offering to reconsider his position if you come back. Says he's still willing to marry you and save the ranch." Zachary's disgust was evident. "I told Thomas to go to hell when he suggested we try to convince you again." Rosalind reached across the table, squeezing her brother's hand gratefully. "Thank you for that. I should have done more before," Zachary said, guilt clear in his voice. "I should have stood up to them from the start." "You're standing up now," she said softly. "That matters." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several ranch hands who called out to Zachary from the doorway. He stood reluctantly. "I have to go. They'll get suspicious if I don't join them. Be careful what you say around Thomas, Vaughn warned, and watch your back with Dawson. He's not a man who forgets a slight. After Zachary left, Rosalind and Vaughn lingered over their meal, discussing their next steps. They would need to visit the land office in Helena, a journey of several days, to verify the claim's status. I can't just leave my job, Rosalind protested. Doc Harris is depending on me. I already spoke to him, Vaughn admitted. He understands this is important and said he can manage for a week without you. You seem to have thought of everything, she said, a note of irritation creeping into her voice. Making decisions about my life without consulting me. Vaughn looked taken aback. That wasn't my intention. I was trying to help. I know, I'm sorry, she sighed, pushing away her half-eaten meal. I'm just tired of men deciding what's best for me, even when they mean well. You're right, he acknowledged. I should have asked first. They walked back to the boarding house in companionable silence, the evening air cool against their skin. Aurora was quiet at this hour, most of its inhabitants either home with their families or at the saloon seeking diversions. As they turned onto Mrs. Holloway's street, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. 3 riders appeared in the dim light, and Rosalind's heart sank as she recognized Thomas's distinctive silhouette leading the group. "Get behind me," Vaughn said quietly, his hand drifting toward his holstered revolver. Thomas reined his horse to a stop a few yards away, his companions Daniel and a ranch hand named Tucker flanking him. Even from a distance, Rosalind could tell her eldest brother was drunk, swaying slightly in the saddle. "Well, look what we have here," Thomas called, his words slurring. "My runaway sister and her knight in dusty denim." "Go home, Thomas," Rosalind said firmly. "You're drunk." "I'm not going anywhere without you, little sister." Thomas dismounted unsteadily. "Dawson came by again today. Says if you come back now, he'll still marry you and forgive this little indiscretion." "That's not happening," Vaughn stated, his voice level but carrying an unmistakable warning. "She's made her choice." Thomas's face darkened. "This isn't about choice. It's about family obligation, about saving what our father built." "Your father built the ranch for all of you," Vaughn countered. "Not just you and your gambling debts." Thomas lunged forward, but Daniel quickly dismounted and caught his arm. "Not here, Tom, not in the middle of the street." "Listen to your brother," Vaughn advised. "Go sleep it off. We can talk tomorrow when you're sober." "We found the map," Thomas said suddenly, his lips curving into a cruel smile. "Zachary isn't as clever as he thinks. I saw him sneaking around Pa's desk." He patted his jacket pocket. "Silver claim, is it? Worth a small fortune if the assays were right." Rosalind felt her heart sink. "Thomas, that claim is as much mine as it is yours. Is it?" Thomas's smile widened. "Because I'm heading to the land office Monday morning to register it solely in my name. As the eldest son and head of the family, I have every right." "That's not legal and you know it," Vaughn said, his voice hardening. "Try and stop me," Thomas challenged, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. Daniel stepped between them. "Enough, this isn't helping anyone." He turned to Rosalind, his expression conflicted. "Rosie, please, come home. We can work this out as a family." "The time for that was before you tried to sell me to Dawson," she replied quietly. Thomas spat on the ground. "Always the dramatic one. No one was selling you. It was a business arrangement, same as women have been making for centuries." "I said enough," Vaughn repeated, this time drawing his revolver halfway from its holster. "You're drunk and making a scene. Go home before the sheriff gets involved." As if on cue, the distinctive figure of Sheriff Mills appeared at the far end of the street, drawn by the commotion. Thomas glared at Vaughn and Rosalind but allowed Daniel to guide him back to his horse. "This isn't over," Thomas called as they rode away. Not by a long shot. Sheriff Mills approached, his weathered face concerned. Everything all right here? Just a family disagreement, Vaughn said smoothly. Nothing to worry about. The sheriff looked skeptical but nodded. See that it stays that way. Aurora's had enough excitement lately without the Kellers adding to it. He tipped his hat to Rosalind. Evening, Miss Keller. After he'd gone, Rosalind turned to Vaughn, her face pale in the moonlight. Thomas has the map. He'll try to claim the silver mine for himself. We still have our copy, Vaughn reminded her, and Zachary on our side, but we need to move quickly. He hesitated, then added, we should leave for Helena tomorrow. Tomorrow. But it's Sunday, and your brother said he's going Monday. We need to beat him there, file the claim properly with your name on it. Vaughn's expression was grave. Thomas is desperate, and desperate men do desperate things. Rosalind knew he was right. Her eldest brother had always been impulsive, prone to rash decisions when backed into a corner. With the ranch on the verge of foreclosure and his pride wounded by the failed marriage arrangement, there was no telling what he might do. All right, she agreed. We'll leave tomorrow. But I need to see Zachary first, warn him about what's happened. I'll send word through one of the stable boys, Vaughn promised. He can meet us at the livery at dawn, Mrs. Holloway was understanding when Rosalind explained she needed to leave unexpectedly, though the details provided were necessarily vague. The older woman packed food for their journey and offered practical advice about traveling clothes and weather predictions. You be careful out there, she said, patting Rosalind's hand. That cowboy of yours seems capable, but the road to Helena can be dangerous this time of year. Spring rains make the rivers run high. He's not my cowboy, Rosalind protested automatically, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Holloway just smiled knowingly. If you say so, dear. Rosalind slept fitfully that night, her dreams filled with images of Thomas and Harold Dawson, their faces merging and separating like reflections in troubled water. She woke before dawn, dressing quickly in her sturdiest skirt and blouse, with a shawl for warmth and her mother's old riding boots that she'd thankfully included when packing her belongings. Vaughn was waiting at the livery stable when she arrived, already saddling 2 horses, his chestnut gelding and a smaller, dappled mare. Zachary paced nearby, his young face drawn with worry. Thomas didn't come home last night, he reported as soon as Rosalind approached. Neither did Daniel. The hands say they were still at the saloon when it closed, talking about riding straight through to Helena. They've got a head start, Vaughn said grimly, tightening a cinch strap. But they'll be slowed by their drinking, and they'll have to rest the horses eventually. There's something else, Zachary added, lowering his voice. Dawson's men were asking around town about hiring guides to the Highwood Mountains. I think he knows about the claim, too. Rosalind felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. How could he know? Thomas, Vaughn guessed, his expression darkening. Probably tried to leverage the claim against his debts. Zachary nodded miserably. I'm so sorry, Rosie. This is all happening because I wasn't careful enough with the map. It's not your fault, she assured him, touching his arm. You were trying to help. She hesitated, then asked, will you be all right if Thomas finds out you warned us? Don't worry about me. I can handle Thomas. Zachary straightened his shoulders, looking suddenly older than his 19 years. You just get to Helena first and make sure that claim is filed properly. After a quick lesson from Vaughn on how to mount and handle the mare, it had been years since Rosalind had ridden regularly, they set off just as the sun crested the eastern horizon. The air was crisp, hinting at the lingering chill of a Montana spring, but the sky promised fair weather for their journey. The road to Helena followed the Missouri River for much of its course, winding through valleys and foothills that were just beginning to green with new growth. Under different circumstances, Rosalind might have enjoyed the journey and the breathtaking scenery. Instead, her mind churned with worry about reaching Helena before her brothers, about confronting whatever legal challenges might arise, about what would happen to the ranch, and to Zachary if things went badly. Vaughn rode beside her, occasionally offering advice about her seat or how to guide the mare over rough terrain, but otherwise respecting her preoccupation with her thoughts. It wasn't until they stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick midday meal that he broached the subject directly. "You're quiet," he observed, handing her a canteen of water. "Having second thoughts?" "No," she said firmly. "Just thinking about what happens after. Even if we secure the claim in my name, Thomas won't simply accept it and move on. He'll fight." "Probably," Vaughn agreed, his honesty refreshing after so many people had tried to soften difficult truths for her. "But having legal standing changes the nature of that fight. It gives you options. And what about Zachary? He's caught in the middle of all this." "Your youngest brother is stronger than you give him credit for. He made his choice to help you, knowing the risks." They continued their journey through the afternoon, pushing the horses as much as they dared without risking injury. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles, good progress, but Helena was still another day's ride away. They made camp in a small clearing near the river, Vaughn efficiently gathering wood for a fire while Rosalind tended to the horses as he'd shown her. The domestic routine of setting up camp felt strangely intimate, a partnership of necessity that nonetheless carried echoes of something deeper. As they sat by the fire eating the simple meal Mrs. Holloway had packed, Rosalind found herself studying Vaughn in the flickering light. He'd been a fixture at the ranch during her late teens, helping her father with the spring roundups and offering advice about horse breeding. She remembered him as capable but distant, always maintaining a respectful formality even as he became her father's trusted friend. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Vaughn looked up from the coffee he was brewing in a small pot nestled among the coals. "Of course. Why did you come back to Aurora? After 2 years away, why return just when?" She trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question. "Just when you needed someone to stop your wedding," he finished with a slight smile. "It wasn't planned that way, if that's what you're asking. I came back because I'd finally saved enough to buy a small spread of my own. I was going to see if any land near the Keller ranch was available." "You wanted to be a rancher. I've been drifting most of my life, working other men's land. It was time to put down roots." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to her. "When I rode into town and heard about the wedding, about the circumstances, I couldn't stand by and let it happen." "Because of your friendship with my father," she pressed, sensing there was more to the story. Vaughn stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "Partly. Jacob was good to me when most weren't. He gave me work when my reputation was complicated, trusted me when others wouldn't." He paused, then added more quietly, "But it wasn't just about him." "What do you mean?" His blue eyes met hers across the flames. "I've always admired your spirit, Rosalind. Even when you were younger, there was a strength in you, a determination." The thought of someone like Dawson breaking that spirit. He shook his head. "I couldn't let it happen, not without trying to stop it." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. For years, she'd thought of Vaughn Kincaid as her father's friend, a man who barely noticed her existence beyond polite greetings. To hear him speak of admiring her, of valuing qualities in her that her own brothers had tried to suppress, it shifted something fundamental in her understanding of their relationship. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing something in me worth fighting for." Their eyes held across the fire for a moment longer than necessary before Vaughn cleared his throat and looked away. "We should get some rest. Long day tomorrow." Rosalind curled up in her bedroll, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness around them, the gentle lapping of the river, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft nickering of the horses. Despite the uncertainty that awaited them in Helena, despite the conflict with her brothers, she felt a peculiar sense of peace. For perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was making her own choices, following her own path. She drifted off to sleep with the firelight casting dancing shadows on the canvas above her, and the comforting knowledge that Vaughn Kincaid was keeping watch nearby. Morning came with a fine mist rising off the river and the promise of another clear day. They broke camp efficiently, Rosalind feeling more confident with the routine after observing Vaughn's methodical approach the previous evening. Her muscles ached from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle, but she said nothing as they mounted up to continue their journey. "Helena by nightfall if we make good time," Vaughn predicted, checking the position of the sun. "Land office opens at 8 tomorrow morning." They rode steadily through the morning, the terrain gradually changing as they moved further west. The open plains gave way to rolling hills, and the distant shapes of mountains began to define the horizon. Rosalind found a rhythm with her mare, her body remembering skills she hadn't used since childhood rides with her father. Around midday, they crested a hill to find a small trading post beside the road, a weathered log building with a stable attached, and several horses already hitched outside. Vaughn reined in, studying the scene with narrowed eyes. "We should rest the horses," he said. "But be careful what you say in there. News travels fast in these parts." Inside, the trading post was dim and smoky, with a counter along one wall displaying basic supplies and a few tables where travelers could take a meal. The proprietor, a grizzled man with one arm, nodded to them as they entered. "Coffee's hot," he called. "Stew's from yesterday but still good." Vaughn ordered food for both of them while Rosalind found a table in the corner with a view of the door. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she scanned the other patrons, two freight drivers playing cards, a young couple who appeared to be homesteaders, and a solitary figure at the far end whose back was turned to her. Something about the set of the man's shoulders made her tense. Vaughn must have sensed her reaction as he returned with their food, because he followed her gaze to the lone figure. "Problem?" he asked softly. "I'm not sure." There's something familiar about the man turned, and Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel." Their eyes met across the room, surprise registering on his face before his expression hardened. Well, he said, standing and approaching their table. "Fancy meeting you two on the road to Helena." Vaughn's hand moved to rest near his holster. "Where's Thomas?" "Ahead of me," Daniel replied, his voice carefully neutral as he glanced between them. "Left at dawn. Should reach Helena by nightfall if the weather holds." Rosalind studied her brother's face, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "You don't have to do this, Daniel. The claim belongs to all of us, not just Thomas." "That's between family," Daniel said, a hint of warning in his tone as he glanced at Vaughn. "And he's not family." "No, I'm not," Vaughn agreed evenly. "But I respected your father enough to want to see his wishes honored. All his children provided for, not just the sons." Daniel's hand clenched at his side. "You have no idea what's at stake. Thomas has made deals, promises to people who don't take kindly to disappointment." "Dawson," Rosalind guessed. "What has Thomas promised him?" Daniel hesitated, conflict clear in his eyes. Of the three brothers, he had always been the most reasonable, the mediator between Thomas's temper and Zachary's idealism. "It's complicated," he said finally. "It always is with Thomas," she replied softly. "But that doesn't make it right." For a moment, something like shame flashed across Daniel's face. "I tried to talk him out of the wedding arrangement," he admitted, "when I realized how much you objected. But by then, Dawson had bought up most of our debts from the bank. He had us over a barrel." "And now," Vaughn pressed, "what's Thomas planning to do with the claim?" Daniel glanced around the trading post, then lowered his voice. "Sell it to Dawson. He's offering $15,000 for the rights, enough to clear our debts and keep the ranch running for another year." "And what happens when that money runs out?" Rosalind asked. "When Thomas gambles it away or makes more bad investments, will you sell another piece of our inheritance? Or perhaps find another sister to marry off?" The barb struck home. Daniel flinched as if she'd slapped him. "It won't come to that. Thomas has promised to change his ways." "Like he's promised 100 times before." She shook her head sadly. "You know better than that, Daniel." A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the ambient sounds of the trading post, the clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the creak of floorboards as the proprietor moved behind the counter. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice so low they had to lean forward to hear. "Thomas isn't alone. Dawson sent 2 of his men with him to ensure his investment," he said, "but we all know what that means." Alarm flashed through Rosalind. "Are you saying Dawson's men are armed guards, that Thomas is essentially their prisoner?" "Not exactly. But they're making sure he gets to Helena and files that claim according to plan." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Rosalind had seen 1,000 times growing up. "I'm supposed to be watching for you, making sure you don't interfere. And now that you've found us?" Vaughn asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the obvious tension. Daniel looked between them again, indecision written clearly on his face. Whatever loyalty he felt to Thomas warred with his conscience, with the uncomfortable knowledge that they were doing wrong by their sister. "I never saw you," he said finally, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table to Rosalind. "And I certainly didn't give you this map showing the old miner's trail that cuts 15 miles off the journey to Helena. A trail that Thomas doesn't know about." Rosalind stared at her brother in disbelief. "Daniel, just promise me something," he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "When this is all over, when the dust settles, remember that not all your brothers betrayed you." With that, he tossed some coins on the table for his meal and strode out of the trading post without looking back. Through the window, Rosalind watched him mount his horse and continue down the main road toward Helena, maintaining the pretense that he was following Thomas as instructed. "Well," Vaughn said after a moment, "that was unexpected." Rosalind carefully unfolded the map Daniel had given them. It showed a trail branching off the main road about 5 miles ahead, cutting through a pass in the foothills that would indeed significantly shorten their journey. "Do you trust it?" she asked. Vaughn studied the map, his expression thoughtful. "It looks legitimate, and I can't see what Daniel would gain by misdirecting us now." He glanced up at her. "The question is, do you trust him?" Rosalind considered this. Daniel had always been the most complex of her brothers, not as openly cruel as Thomas could be, but not as steadfastly kind as Zachary either. He was a man caught between competing loyalties, trying to navigate the treacherous waters of family obligation without a moral compass. "I think," she said slowly, "that he's trying to do the right thing in his own way, even if he's not brave enough to stand openly against Thomas." They finished their meal in contemplative silence, then returned to their horses. The thought of Thomas traveling with Dawson's men added a new urgency to their journey. If they could reach Helena first, file the claim in Rosalind's name before Thomas arrived, They might force a reckoning that would prevent her eldest brother from selling their inheritance out from under them. The miner's trail proved to be as significant a shortcut as Daniel had suggested, though considerably more challenging terrain than the main road. It wound through steep hillsides and rocky passes where they were forced to dismount and lead the horses. But by sunset, they had made remarkable progress, emerging from the foothills to see the lights of Helena glimmering in the distance. "We'll push on," Vaughn decided, despite the gathering darkness. "Better to reach town tonight than camp so close." By the time they rode into Helena, it was fully dark, the streets illuminated by gaslights that cast pools of yellow light at regular intervals. Despite the late hour, the town hummed with activity. Saloons and gambling houses were doing brisk business, and miners fresh from the diggings mingled with businessmen and laborers. Helena in 1876 was a far cry from the rough mining camp it had been a decade earlier. Now the territorial capital boasted substantial brick buildings, churches, schools, and a growing population of respectable citizens alongside the prospectors and adventurers who had first settled the area. Vaughn led them to a modest hotel on a side street, away from the noise and bustle of Last Chance Gulch, the town's main thoroughfare. "Wait here," he told Rosalind, dismounting and securing both horses to a hitching post. "I'll see about rooms." When he returned a few minutes later, his expression was grim. "Thomas is here, registered earlier this evening with 2 companions." Rosalind's heart sank. "We're too late." "Not necessarily. The land office doesn't open until morning. We just need to be first in line." He helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I've secured rooms for us, adjacent, with a connecting door that locks from both sides." The hotel was simple but clean, with gas lamps in the hallways and plain furnishings in the rooms. Rosalind's accommodations included a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a small writing desk by the window. After days on the trail, even these modest comforts seemed luxurious. A soft knock at the connecting door revealed Vaughn, who had removed his trail dust and changed into a clean shirt. "You should try to get some rest," he advised. "Tomorrow will be challenging." "I'm not sure I can sleep," she admitted. "Knowing Thomas is here, probably planning his next move against us. All the more reason to conserve your strength." His expression softened with concern. "You've ridden hard for 2 days with hardly a complaint. That's impressive for someone who hasn't been on horseback in years." "I'll pay for it tomorrow," she said with a rueful smile, already feeling the stiffness settling into her muscles. "But it will be worth it if we can secure the claim." Vaughn hesitated in the doorway. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Rosalind, know that you've already shown more courage than most people show in a lifetime. Standing up to your brothers, refusing Dawson, making this journey that takes real strength." His words warmed her more than they should have, sending a flutter through her chest that had nothing to do with their impending confrontation with Thomas. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me when it seemed no one else did." Something flickered in his blue eyes, an emotion she couldn't quite identify before he masked it with a slight smile. "Get some rest. I'll wake you before dawn." Despite her certainty that sleep would elude her, Rosalind drifted off almost as soon as her head touched the pillow, exhaustion overriding anxiety. She dreamed of silver mountains and rushing rivers, of her father's kind face and her mother's gentle hands. And somewhere in those dreams, Vaughn Kincaid rode beside her, a steady presence in a world of uncertainty. The sky was still dark when a soft knock roused her from slumber. Vaughn's voice came through the door, low and urgent. "Rosalind, it's time." She dressed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, her fingers clumsy with lingering sleep and nervous anticipation. Outside her window, the streets of Helena were quiet, only the occasional lamp burning in an upper window to indicate that others were stirring. Vaughn was waiting in the hallway, hat in hand, his expression alert despite the early hour. "I checked the land office," he reported as they descended the stairs. "No sign of Thomas or his companions yet. Could they be watching from somewhere else?" she asked, glancing nervously at the shadows as they emerged onto the street. "Possible. Which is why we're going to approach from the back alley and enter through the side door. The clerk opens it early for the janitors." The Territorial Land Office occupied a substantial brick building near the courthouse, its imposing facade designed to convey the gravity of the transactions conducted within. As Vaughn had predicted, a side entrance stood slightly ajar, allowing them to slip inside without being observed from the street. The interior was hushed and dim, smelling of paper and ink and the beeswax used to polish the wooden counters. A sleepy-looking clerk was just lighting the lamps when they approached. "We're here to register a mining claim," Vaughn announced without preamble. "It's urgent." The young man blinked in surprise. "Sir, we don't officially open for another hour, I understand," Vaughn interrupted smoothly, placing a gold coin on the counter. "But this young lady has ridden for 2 days to ensure her inheritance is properly documented. Surely you can make an exception." The clerk hesitated, glancing between them and the gold piece. "I suppose I could start the paperwork," he conceded. "What's the nature of the claim?" "Silver," Rosalind spoke up, stepping forward. "Originally staked by my father, Jacob Keller, in 1868. I have the original map and documentation." As the clerk began recording the necessary information in a large ledger, the front door of the office rattled, then burst open with enough force to send it crashing against the wall. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face contorted with rage, flanked by 2 burly men whose hands rested on holstered pistols. "Stop right there," he commanded, striding toward the counter. "That claim belongs to the Keller family, and I am the head of the family." The clerk froze, pen poised above the paper, his eyes wide with alarm. "Sir, you," Thomas pointed at Vaughn, ignoring the clerk entirely. "You have interfered in family business for the last time." "This is family business," Rosalind countered, stepping forward to face her brother. "And last I checked, I'm still a Keller. Father's will left the ranch and all its assets to be divided equally among his children, all his children." "A technicality," Thomas sneered. "Women don't run ranches or develop mining claims." "Maybe they should," she replied evenly. "They certainly couldn't do worse than you've done." Thomas's face darkened dangerously. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough," Vaughn cut in, his voice steel. "The law is clear, Thomas. Jacob's will stated equal shares to all his children. The claim is as much Rosalind's as it is yours." One of Thomas's companions, a scar-faced man with cold eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Dawson doesn't like complications," he said meaningfully. "He sent us to make sure there weren't any." "Mr. Dawson has no legal standing here," Vaughn replied, his hand drifting toward his holster. "And threatening a government office is a federal offense." The clerk, visibly sweating now, cleared his throat. Perhaps I should fetch the territorial marshal. He could help resolve this dispute." "No need," came a new voice from the doorway. Sheriff Mills from Aurora stood there, flanked by Daniel and Zachary Keller. "I believe I can handle this situation." Rosalind stared in disbelief. "Sheriff, what are you doing in Helena?" "Got word there might be trouble," Mills replied, stepping inside and surveying the tense scene. "Seems I was right." Thomas rounded on Daniel and Zachary. "You brought him here. You traitors." "We brought him to prevent bloodshed," Daniel said firmly. "This has gone far enough, Thomas. We're not losing our sister over a mine or a ranch or your gambling debts." Sheriff Mills moved between the opposing groups, his hand resting casually on his own sidearm. "Now, I understand there's a dispute over a mining claim. As I see it, there are two ways to resolve this. The legal way, which involves recognizing all parties' rights under Jacob Keller's will, or the hard way, which involves arrests for attempted coercion of a government official." He fixed Thomas's companions with a stern look. "I don't imagine Mr. Dawson would be pleased to have his name connected to that sort of trouble." The two men exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their position now that law enforcement was involved. After a moment, the scarred man spoke. "Mr. Dawson sent us to secure his investment, but he wouldn't want any legal complications." "Smart man," Sheriff Mills nodded. "Now, why don't you gentlemen wait outside while the Kellers sort out their family business?" With obvious reluctance, Dawson's men retreated, though not without a parting glare at Thomas that clearly communicated their employer would be displeased. Once they were gone, the sheriff turned to the clerk. "Record this claim in the names of all 4 Keller children as equal partners. That's the legal way to handle it, according to what I know of Jacob's will." Thomas spluttered in outrage, but a warning look from Daniel silenced him. The clerk, relieved that violence seemed to have been averted, hastily completed the paperwork, requiring each of the Keller siblings to sign. When it was done, when the claim to the silver mine was officially recorded with all 4 names listed as equal owners, Rosalind felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about recognition, about having her rightful place in her father's legacy acknowledged. Outside the land office, the sun had risen fully, casting long shadows across the street as morning commerce began to stir around them. Sheriff Mills took Thomas aside for what appeared to be a stern conversation, while Daniel and Zachary approached Rosalind and Vaughn. "I'm sorry it came to this," Daniel said, genuine regret in his voice. "We should have stood up to Thomas sooner." "Yes, you should have," Rosalind agreed, not quite ready to forgive completely. "But you're standing up now. That counts for something." Zachary, looking relieved that bloodshed had been avoided, added, "What happens next? With the mine, I mean." "That's something we all need to discuss," Rosalind said, glancing at Vaughn for support. "As equal partners," Vaughn nodded approvingly. "A professional assessment would be the first step. Determine exactly what you're dealing with before making any decisions about development or sale." "And what about Dawson?" Daniel asked, lowering his voice. "He won't take this well." "Let me worry about Dawson," Sheriff Mills interjected, rejoining the group. "I've been wanting to take a closer look at his business dealings for some time. Seems he's been applying undue pressure to quite a few folks around Aurora." As they discussed next steps, Thomas stood apart, his expression a mixture of anger and defeat. Rosalind felt a pang of sympathy despite everything. Her eldest brother had always carried the heaviest burden after their parents died, taking on responsibility for the ranch and his siblings when he was barely more than a boy himself. He'd made terrible choices, but perhaps not entirely without reason. She approached him cautiously. "Thomas." He looked up, wariness replacing some of the anger in his eyes. "Come to gloat, no," she said softly. "To suggest we try to start over, as a family." He gave a bitter laugh. "After everything that's happened, you think we can just go back to playing happy family, not back, no, forward." She met his gaze steadily. "The mine belongs to all of us now. Legally, we can use it to save the ranch, pay off the debts, make a fresh start, but only if we work together." Thomas was silent for a long moment, studying her face as if searching for deception or weakness. Finally, he sighed, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "You sound like Pa," he admitted grudgingly, "always talking about fresh starts." "He was a wise man," she replied, "wiser than we gave him credit for." Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Mills, who approached with purpose in his stride. "Just got word," he announced to the group. "Harold Dawson left Aurora suddenly last night, took his valuables and headed east on the evening train." "Left," Daniel repeated in disbelief. "Just like that, seems so. My deputy found evidence he'd been cooking his books for years. Guess he figured the game was up once his strong-arm tactics came to light." The sheriff looked satisfied. "Good riddance, I say." With Dawson's departure, the immediate threat to both Rosalind's freedom and the Keller ranch disappeared. The legal recording of the mine claim in all four siblings' names ensured that no single brother could sell or leverage it without the other's consent. It was, in many ways, the best possible outcome. As they prepared to return to Aurora the following day, Rosalind found herself standing with Vaughn on the balcony of the hotel, watching the bustle of Helena below them. The setting sun painted the distant mountains gold and purple, a reminder of the beauty that existed beyond human conflicts and concerns. "What will you do now?" Vaughn asked, his voice gentle in the evening air. "Help run the ranch properly," she replied without hesitation. "Use my share of the mine to clear the debts and make improvements. The Keller land has always been my home. I just need to make sure my brothers understand I'm a partner now, not a possession." "And they will," he said with conviction. "They've seen what happens when they try to control you." Rosalind turned to study his profile, the strong line of his jaw and the thoughtful set of his mouth. "What about you? You mentioned wanting to buy land near our ranch." A faint smile curved his lips. "I still do, if the welcome would be warm." Something in his tone made her pulse quicken. From the Kellers in general, or from one Keller in particular? He turned to face her fully, his blue eyes intent. "I think you know the answer to that, Rosalind." "Perhaps I do," she murmured, "but I'd like to hear you say it." Vaughn took her hand, his touch warm and certain. "I came back to Aurora for land, yes, but I stayed because of you. Because from the moment I saw you again, I knew that whatever future I built, I wanted you to be part of it. Even though I come with complicated brothers and family drama," she asked, only half joking. "Even then," he assured her, his smile widening. "Some things are worth the trouble." As the last light faded from the sky, Vaughn leaned down, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like both a beginning and a homecoming. Rosalind's arms wound around his neck, drawing him closer as she returned the kiss with all the certainty she felt about this man who had stood between her and disaster, who had said enough when no one else would. 1 year later, spring blossoms dotted the hillsides around the Keller ranch as Rosalind stood on the porch of the newly built cabin that overlooked the property. The silver mine had indeed proved valuable, not a bonanza, but productive enough to clear the ranch's debts and fund improvements that had been neglected for years. New breeding stock, repaired fences, and a proper irrigation system had transformed the struggling operation into a promising venture. More importantly, the relationships between the Keller siblings had been slowly mending. Thomas, humbled by his near disaster with Dawson, had reluctantly accepted Rosalind's role in ranch management, eventually coming to appreciate her head for figures and practical approach to problems. Daniel had found his voice, no longer caught between loyalties but standing firmly for what he believed was right. And Zachary had matured into a confident young man who would soon begin studying veterinary medicine in Denver, with full support from his siblings. "Wool-gathering," came Vaughn's voice as he joined her on the porch, slipping an arm around her waist. "Just appreciating how much has changed," she replied, leaning into his embrace. The simple gold band on her left hand caught the sunlight, a reminder of their wedding 3 months earlier, a joyful affair attended by the entire town of Aurora, including Mrs. Holloway, who had wept happy tears throughout the ceremony. Vaughn Kincaid had indeed purchased land adjacent to the Keller ranch, though he spent more time on Keller property than his own these days. Together, they were building something that honored Jacob Keller's legacy while creating their own path forward. "Thomas says the new calves are the strongest he's seen in years," Vaughn reported. "Seems that bull you insisted on was worth the price after all." "I do occasionally know what I'm talking about," she teased, turning in his arms to face him. "More than occasionally," he acknowledged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're the wisest investment I ever made." "Investment," she echoed with mock indignation. "Is that what I am?" "Partnership," he corrected, his eyes warm with love. "The best kind." As they stood together, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, Rosalind reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From a forced wedding interrupted by a man brave enough to say enough, to this moment of peace and possibility, it was not a path she could have imagined a year ago. Yet somehow, standing in Vaughn's arms with the future stretching before them, it felt exactly right. Not an ending, but a beginning, their beginning, written in their own words rather than dictated by others. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying all the gratitude and hope she felt. "And I love you," he replied, sealing the promise with a kiss as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Enough to last a lifetime. And in the years that followed through the birth of their children, through droughts and bountiful seasons, through all the challenges and joys that came with building a life together, that love proved more than enough. It became the foundation of everything, strong, enduring, and freely given, just as it should be.